This is the Birth of a Mama podcast, where birth, and especially postpartum, matter. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Birth of a Mama podcast. Today, I have Rachel Simpson on the show. Rachel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you're here. Let's have you start off by just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and your family.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Buffalo, New York. Currently living in Buffalo still. I am a registered dietitian. I've been a registered dietitian for, 13 years now. I lived in Florida for about a year and a half right after graduation and then moved back to Buffalo. So since then, I've been working at Roswell Park. I actually just worked my last day at Roswell Park as a clinical dietitian last week. So I just needed a little bit of a shift and a little bit of a change. So I will be working with the developmentally disabled starting next week. But in addition to that, I do also have a private practice for nutrition counseling. So within that, I provide nutrition counseling for, an array of topics. So whether it be weight loss, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, eating disorders, sports nutrition, kind of whatever you're looking for. I have been married to my husband for almost 5 years now. And we have 2 living kids together, Theodore and Gabriel. And then we have 2 dogs, 2 Rhodesian Ridgebacks. I'm not sure who's more of a handful, the kids or the dogs. I'm probably going to say the dogs. And they're full of energy, but the kids are great too. And so my husband currently is deployed. So I'm trying to tackle all this on my own, but we're doing good. And so, yeah, as a family, we love to do really anything, athletic. My husband and I have done, I've done 1 Ironman. He's training for his 3rd. We like to run. We like to weight lift. So that's kind of our story.
Wow, Rachel, you are an inspiration. You have so much. Your life sounds incredibly busy and fulfilling. So that is amazing. I like to segue into your story by asking you this question. If you had to describe your transition into motherhood in 3 words, which would you choose and why?
So crazy and chaotic, but in a good way. It's just a lot. It's a lot to handle. There's a lot of change. I think going from 0 to 1 was a bigger change than going from 1 to 2 kids. Just because obviously everything really does change. I think I was a little more laid back with, my second living son, just because, you did it all and you kind of like relax a little. You're not as anxious, but it's still crazy. And then I would say unconditional love. Honestly, these kids, they're great. Kids are great. People will have their negative talk about, kids and, mom life and things like that. And yeah, that all happens. But, at the end of the day, they're great. They really are. And then my 3rd word would probably be selfless. So, you really have to give yourself when you have kids. You really do. You can still have yourself. And I think that's kind of really what, moms, they feel like they do lose themselves. But I just, in a way, yes, you do, but in a way you kind of have to, because you have to give yourself to these kids. But you still can find yourself and do your own things that you did before you had kids. And, when we kind of talk about, my postpartum experience, my husband and I did a really good job in allowing ourselves to still be ourselves and do the things we liked before we had kids.
That's so important. And I think it's also, it's a new you. There is really no going back to the person you were before completely, because you're totally changed, right? Permanently. So yeah, it's so true. All right. Well, I also like to ask if you had any expectations of what the postpartum period was going to be like. So for yourself, and if your partner had any expectations, and if you guys, talked about that, and yeah, how that kind of looked for you.
Yeah. So I expected, and this is probably going to sound weird, but I expected with my firstborn postpartum to be much more difficult than it was. And I think some moms are going to be a little mad when I say that. But my postpartum experience, my whole pregnancy and my labor and my postpartum experience with my first was amazing. And once we get deeper into the conversation, I think that really made me naive to the things that then happened after that pregnancy. But no, I expected to kind of be like laid up on the couch, and which I probably should have been, but like I got right back into things, but that's also my personality. So I expected things to be a little more difficult, not bounce back, and I hate that word, but as fast as I did. Um, but yeah, I mean, my husband and I really did kind of tag team in a lot of things, whether it be waking up in the middle of the night, um, or diaper changes, or household chores, things like that during the postpartum period. And we did a really good job in that. But I expected it to be a little more difficult than it was, and it wasn't physically. Emotionally too, I think I did very, very well. You know, yeah, there were times where, emotions were kind of crazy, but I felt like I handled it quite well.
That is awesome. That's a pleasant surprise, I would say, because I think most women, it's the opposite. They think, oh, I don't need to prepare. It's going to be fine. I think birth is going to be the hardest part, which is debatable. Obviously, birth is still going to be a challenge, of course, but I think we focus so much on that part and then we don't focus a lot on postpartum. So I'm so happy to hear that it was the opposite for you and that you
Yeah.
actually had an easier time than you expected. That's great. So let's jump into your first pregnancy. If we want to do chronologically, you can talk about your first pregnancy and then we can kind of move forward from there in time, if that sounds good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So my first son, his name is Theodore. And so he was born May 7th. So my whole pregnancy was really, really good. Before I got pregnant with him, I was very athletic. I was running, weightlifting. And when I got pregnant, I continued to do those same things. Um, Actually, up until I think I ran up until like 34 weeks pregnant, um, just because I felt like, I mean, I wasn't running as many miles as I was, but it felt good. And then all of a sudden, I started having some sciatic nerve pain for about 3 weeks, and then that went away. But for the most part, I think I lifted up until the day I went into labor with him. So during pregnancy, it was great. I had no issues. Had my checkups. I was working with um, a midwife at that time and my doulas. So I actually had my son out of hospital, which we can talk about. But yeah, so I was working with. I had kind of like, if you want to say like the minimalist amount of checkups you could, just working with a midwife. I was considered advanced maternal age. Um, so I was 35. But so I had, I did do genetic testing at 10 or 11 weeks. So we did find out the gender right away. But everything after that, my anatomy scan was fine. Everything looked fine on all my scans. And throughout the whole pregnancy, we worked alongside my midwife, two doulas, and within there, like birthing classes, things like that, which, I can give recommendations for anyone interested in the Buffalo area because they are just amazing. Um, and then my plan was to go into, natural labor. I wanted to just go into spontaneous labor, and have my son. So my due date was May 2nd. And my doulas, or my midwife, was going to allow me to obviously go to like 42 weeks. Any longer than that, we'd have to decide what we wanted to do. And I went into labor 40 and 4, so 40 weeks and 4 days. Spontaneous. I just started having probably contractions around like 3 in the afternoon the one day. And then they started to really pick up at about 6 p.m. Um, and from 6 p.m. to midnight, I labored at home, which was, they were pretty intense contractions. Obviously, when you don't know what to expect, it's very different. Uh, um, it's a little weird because you're like, oh man, these are really, really bad. And then they just keep getting worse.
Yeah.
You think that's the worst, and you're like, oh, we're almost there. And it's like, no. Um,
Yeah.
so between 6 and midnight, I labored at home, and there was lots of stuff going on. Like I was throwing up. I, you know, the like water made me feel really good. I took like showers and baths, and we were on the phone with our doulas during that time, and they were kind of giving my husband pointers of like, you know, hip squeezes and positions to kind of make me feel a little more comfortable. Um, and it was kind of like with my first labor, without my doulas like really, really right there, I kind of like laid in one position because I was like, this is the only way I feel good. But then when I did have contractions, they felt the worst, which then I learned in subsequent pregnancies to move around more to make it feel better. But anyway, so around midnight, I would say I think my contractions probably got around like 3 to 5 minutes. So we thought kind of like, all right, this is happening. So we needed a little bit of a change of scenery. So my doula's house was actually right around the corner from the birthing center. So we're like, let's go there. Let's have a little change of scenery. We can maybe labor there for a little while and then head on over to the birthing center when we feel it's appropriate. Because we were about 30 minutes away from both those locations, which is pretty far when you're thinking, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
um, we went there and I labored all night. I mean, it was from midnight to 7, and I thought like it was the same thing. It was like 3 minutes apart. My doula was there kind of timing things. And then all of a sudden the sun came up and they stopped. And yeah, and I
Oh
was like,
man.
that's kidding me. So they were now like 20 minutes apart. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So, um, and again, at that point too, like I didn't want to like, I wanted the least amount of interventions as possible. So my doula was like, why don't we go to the birthing center and get checked? And I'm like, all right, I didn't really want to, but I'm like, let's go. And so they did a cervical check and I was 3.5 centimeters dilated. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. So they're like, just go back home. Like they will start again, but we don't know when. And like, just go home, try to get some rest. And it's crazy because like the doulas are great and the midwives are great, but the things they say and at that time in your mind, they're like, go home, get some rest, get some sleep, eat some food. That's like the last thing you want to do, but it's like what you do need to do. Um, and so at first you just think they're crazy and they're really not. But so we went home and I did lay down for about 2 hours and my husband made me some food. And so from like 8 to 10, I was having like every 20 minutes contractions, but nothing like crazy. And so I was like, oh, this is going to last forever. Like I literally felt like this pregnancy or this labor was going to be days long. So then about 10:30, I got up and felt like a lot of pressure. And I tried to go to the bathroom and my water broke. And so this was still at home. So my water broke. So I ended up taking another shower bath. And at this point, contractions started to pick up again, like hot and heavy. So I was like, all right. And at that point too, I called my doula and I was like, I don't think I could do this. Like I literally, my husband had a hospital in his phone, like directions to a hospital, because I'm like, there's no way I can do this. And so doulas are, they're something else because she like talked me out of going to the hospital. She was like, just get in the car, come to the birthing center. We're going to work through this. Like so calm and so like cool and collected. And I was like, all right. So we drive to the birthing center and they're there. And so we probably got there by that time around like noon. And I was like, I have so much pressure, like lots of pressure. So they're like, it's probably time to push. I never got another cervical check. They just kind of went off of how I felt. And so they said, do you want to get in the tub? And I said, yes. So they filled up the birthing tub. And I probably got in there around 12:30, I think, maybe 1. I know I ended up pushing in the tub for probably about 2 hours, I think. So pretty long, but it was like it felt good in the tub. Like again, the water was the only thing that made me feel good. So then, the whole birth experience in the tub was awesome. Like, I could feel his head coming out. Yes, it was painful, but it was great. And then I had him in the tub, and um, I sat in the tub with him for a little bit. And I think that was my favorite part of the entire of all my postpartum experiences was at a birthing center. And I wanted to do another out of hospital birth with all my kids, but it was not possible after that. But the experience of literally getting out of the tub with my baby still attached to my placenta inside me, obviously, getting out of the tub, laying in the bed with my son, no one like touching me, patting me down, patting my baby down. Like, it was an amazing experience. Um, we got into bed. Um, they did give me a shot of pitocin to help with obviously the delivery of the placenta, which didn't happen for about 45 minutes later, just because it was pretty stuck in there. But then they still kept the baby attached, kept him attached, and they put the placenta in like a tin bowl next to me. My doula and both my doulas and my midwife were amazing of like, hey, do you need a cup of tea? We want to see you eat something, like those types of things. Just what do you need? We'll take care of you. And just like allowed myself and my husband and our son to just lay in the bed that they had. And we probably laid there for about an hour and a half. At that time, I did want to just go home. Like, it was nice to be there, but I was like, I want to go home with my baby. So they stitched me up. I had like 4 stitches on my like right. I had like a right labial tear. They gave me a little bit of a lidocaine shot to stitch me up, which is worse was worse than delivery. I'm gonna be honest. I think just because like all of a sudden you like calm down that rush after delivery. But it was your hormones are going, you're shaking, they're trying to stitch you up, and so anyways, they did all that. Everything looked good. Like, I didn't have any postpartum complications, no extreme blood loss, no like tears that couldn't be stitched up. So all that went great. I was able to keep food down, liquid down. Baby was great. Super cute in how they weigh them and measure them and everything. It was a great experience. Very quiet and no monitors and things beeping. So then we went home. So I had him at 2:51 in the afternoon, and we were home by 8 p.m. And honestly, it was great just to be home. Like, we picked up dinner on the way home. We didn't go out to dinner, but we just picked it up and got home and just relaxed. And it was weird to be home like 5 hours after I just had a kid, but it was nice I just wanted to be home. I'm that type of person that I don't want to be in any medical setting, even if it is not a hospital birthing center. And so we came home and everything was good. And what's cool about the midwives and doulas is the doulas kept checking on me, from whether it be through text or say like, hey, do you want me to stop over the next day? The midwives actually did stop over. I can't remember if it was the day after or 2 days after, to do one other test that they had to do. It was like the PKU test on his foot. But they did stop over, so I didn't have to physically leave the house. I think it was the next day, because then I think we went to the pediatrician 3 days later. But it was very nice to have people come to you and not have to leave the house with a newborn. Granted, he was born in like the spring, summer, which was nice, but I think that should happen with a lot of things, with even like pediatricians. I understand that that's probably not going to ever happen, but maybe with newborns, they can come up with something that they can go to everyone's house instead of dragging a 3-year-old out of the house, or a 3-day-old out of the house. So that was our experience with Theodore. So honestly, it was great. I ended up, I felt like he was my one that I had the most postpartum bleeding with him. I would say for the longest, but I also attribute that to having only a shot of pitocin instead of like a bag of pitocin after I delivered him. Um, but I feel like I definitely rushed into working out, I can say, after I had him. And that was my fault. You'll kind of notice as I talk about my other pregnancies and births that I tried to slow down a little after, but I know if we have more, I think I'm going to end up laying in bed for like 2 weeks straight and not doing anything. But I was definitely working out at 4 weeks postpartum, which was not appropriate. I would like that. It was not appropriate. But yeah, so and I did breastfeed with him. And that was another thing that, the doulas were helpful for giving pointers with that. And they offered to come over at any point too if there were any complications with breastfeeding. Um, so, so yeah, that's kind of his pregnancy and labor. So
That
there's
is
a lot.
awesome. I that's I related to so much of the beginning of your story because I also labored for a long time and then ended up in going to the hospital thinking I'm for sure like far along, like we need to get there, and it was a 45-minute drive and it's my first time, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, you're a 2." And I just remember feeling like, "What?"
Right.
There's no way I can do this if I'm a 2. And that was, like what I just experienced got me to a 2. I'm going to die. Like I can't make it through. So I totally resonated with your whole story of what I'm a 3.
Yeah.
You're kidding. So, and then, yeah, hearing the advice of just try to rest, like go home, get some sleep. And you're like, how could I possibly do that right now when that is exactly what you need? So yeah, so good. And then midwifery model of care is just so much more comprehensive and so much more adequate in terms of, it's more hands off. They don't intervene. They kind of hold the space for you. They trust in your body. So that helps you to trust in your body, all of those things. And then coming to you afterwards, checking up on you. I mean, in the postpartum, after a hospital birth, after you go home, there's nothing. No one checks up on you. You have maybe a 6-week follow up with your OB, and then it's like, that's just not enough. So I'm really glad you had that for your first experience, and honestly attribute that to you having such a positive experience, I think, and it being better than you expected.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. I love that so much. So breastfeeding went well. Did you have any struggles with that, or how did that go?
No, it went well. I would say I didn't have that connection that I feel like most mothers have with like the breastfeeding. I breastfed for 2 months and then I exclusively pumped for an additional 2 months. And I think I would have done it longer, but I went back to work at 3 months postpartum, which was another one of my mistakes. I ended up staying out much longer with my other babies. But again, me being that person who feels like you need to just keep doing things. Um, but pumping at work and then working and then private practice, it was a lot. I was like, so I did it for a month, and it was, man, breastfeeding and pumping is a full-time job. So it was like trying to find time to do it. I never had great milk supply, like never. And so there were times that we even had a supplement with some formula when I was breastfeeding and pumping, just because I was never a good producer. So that was kind of a struggle. But I did want to do it as long as I could before like a breaking point. But then at 4 months, I was like, I can't mentally do this anymore. You know what I mean? I think it was mentally getting to me, which was then even making my milk supply even less. So I was like, this isn't working. And I had to kind of break from that, like, because I would have loved to have been able to do it for a year, but I was like, no, this is not healthy for you. Like, so don't try to keep doing it. So I stopped.
Yeah. I'm really happy that you did that and that you did what you needed to do for your mental health and your overall health, because I think a lot of times as mothers, we put ourselves on the back burner, like, oh, the baby is more important than me, even though without you the baby can't survive, right? So I had a very similar experience. I wanted to breastfeed so badly. I had low milk supply, baby had tongue and lip and cheek ties, and all the things that could make breastfeeding more of a challenge basically happened. So it was kind of like, okay, at what point do I kind of move on to something that's going to serve both of us better? And that was hard. It can be really hard for moms to have to make that decision when it's something that they really wanted, but it's just not serving them well anymore, and it's just not worth it at a certain point. So I'm really glad that you at least were able to kind of understand that. And I know a lot of women have to go through like a lot of guilt with that, kind of moving on to formula or having to even supplement with formula at any point. So, but totally nothing wrong with formula. I'm of the philosophy that fed is best.
Right.
So even as dietitians, I think we can both
Yeah.
agree that fed is best, right? Yeah, 100%. Like mom's mental health matters. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. What else? Is there anything else you want to touch on? Like, was there any point in postpartum when things shifted greatly for you? I know some women say, like, oh, at the 6 month mark, like, I started to feel like me again, or at the 3 month mark, or at the 12 month mark, there was kind of a shift in my experience or my perspective or my identity. Did anything like that kind of happen for you?
Um, it's hard to say because I got pregnant 5 months after I had Theo.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, there's a huge shift.
yeah. So like I went back to work at 3 months. I could say my anxiety, and I have a history of anxiety, did get worse around 4 months, but I can't correlate that. Is that due to postpartum or me being back at work with a new baby? I don't know. And so, but then 5 months after I did get pregnant with our son Lincoln. So again, then there's, you really can't tell what's causing what. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
It's hard to weed out, okay, what's the cause of my emotions or, yeah, my mental health stuff going on
yeah,
here. So, okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, then if you want to jump into that pregnancy and we can talk about that and kind of move forward from there.
yeah, yeah. So, got pregnant with Lincoln in what, October, November. So, um, yeah, I mean, and I'm gonna have to say, like, getting pregnant for us was pretty easy, and I think that frustrates a lot of people because I know a lot of people who go through IVF, and our issue with us is keeping pregnancies. That's a hard issue for us. And so Lincoln, got pregnant with him pretty easy, and then I think it was right after my first period because I stopped breastfeeding at 4 months, and then got my period, and then got pregnant with him. And so everything was fine. Around like 7, 8 weeks pregnant, I had a lot of vaginal pressure, like a lot. And like pressure that I didn't feel with Theodore until like 32, 34 weeks. And so I brought it up to my midwife, and she's like, it's probably because you ran too early, you lifted too much, and like all that kind of stuff. Like you just had a baby, you're really only 5 months postpartum. So I'm like, okay. So that was fine. I just kind of went with it, and I did end up making an appointment with a pelvic floor therapist, which I highly recommend every pregnant woman to go to a pelvic floor therapist during and postpartum. If you're in the Buffalo area, Kathy Kiggins is amazing. A lot of them don't take insurance. She does. She is she's booked crazy. But so, like, my appointment, I called at like 8 weeks. I couldn't get into her until like 20 weeks. So, like, I had to wait quite a bit of time. But I highly recommend them. So, anyway, so I made that appointment. And then around everything was kind of going fine, still having pressure. And at points, honestly, like it was like I meal prep a lot and cook a lot. And there were points when I would be cooking and meal prepping and I would have to sit down because the pressure was so much, which was very odd to me. So everyone kept reassuring me that everything was fine. So then 17 weeks and 5 days, I started having like brown spotting. And, I think with any pregnancy, you get a little nervous with everything, but I didn't really think of too much with the brown spotting. But I did call my midwife, and she said, just keep an eye on it. We'll see if anything changes, if it worsens or turns to blood. So the next day, it turned to blood. Not a lot, but it was blood. And so I called my midwife again, and she was concerned. She said, um, you know, let's schedule you for an ultrasound. And all my other ultrasounds, like I had one at like 10 weeks, was fine. Like everything looked fine. They did, an internal and just a regular ultrasound, and everything looked fine. So I went in and got an ultrasound, and she was like, it was like one of those things where they leave you in the room for a while, and you're like, what is going on? So she comes back in, she goes, the doctor wants to talk to you. And so now everyone's making me nervous. So the doctor's like, we don't really know what's going on. We think your cervix is starting to shorten, but we also think that your placenta is starting to pull away. So we're like, I don't like they didn't really even know what was going on. So like basically, well, we want you to go see a high risk doctor. So So I called my midwife. So they were going to call my midwife to let them know, and then my midwife contacted me after, and they got me in with an amazing high risk doctor who ended up retiring when I got pregnant with my son Gabriel, but which I was really upset with. But he was Dr. Ogburn, amazing. Got in with him, and they ended up doing um, another ultrasound. They at that point they were able to do like anatomy, partial anatomy scans because he was like almost 18 weeks. So even with my ultrasound that I had at the Winsong, they did a partial anatomy scan and everything physically looked good on the baby. And then when I went into the high risk doctor, they did another partial anatomy scan because they really couldn't see the heart too well because he wasn't 20 weeks yet. And then he checked me and he's like, no, everything looks fine. So he said everything looked fine. So I was like, okay. He said you could have some. I can't think of the word now. Um, I can't think of the word. So some bleeding within the cervix that is normal during pregnancy sometimes when just cells from the cervix kind of slough off a little. So anyway, so he said go on, and so I'm like, all right. So we did schedule another appointment for like 2 weeks later. Okay, so between like 17 and 6 days and like a week later, I had increasing bleeding, increasing pressure, and increasing discharge of like odd materials. Okay, and I would take pictures of them and send them to my midwife, and at one point I did end up going to the emergency room at Children's, and because the bleeding was also bad, and they're like, no, everything's fine, nothing's wrong. Um, so my cervical length was, well, at one point they did think that my cervical length was short, which was very odd because then they thought the cervical length was short, but then when I got it checked at Children's, they said, no, it's normal. So there was a difference of, listen, there was a difference of 11 millimeter or, yeah, 11 millimeter cervical length and a 30. So like there was a huge difference.
That's
And
big.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So I don't know what the heck was going on. So then all of a sudden they're like, no, everything's fine, nothing's wrong, blah, blah, blah. So then I went in for my official scheduled anatomy scan on 19 weeks and 1 day. And that was like scheduled before any issues happened. And I went in and I told her about the bleeding and everything. And she looked at everything. She goes, no, everything looks good. Cervical length looks good. Baby looks good. Placenta looks good. Everything looks good. So then the next day, I had bleeding that was, and I'm not sure if it was because maybe she did like the internal ultrasound and like messed with anything or what was going on. I had bleeding that was so bad. Like I was using pads. And so at that point, I called my midwife and I was like, I think I need to go to the high risk doctor again. There's something going on. So I went back to Dr. Ogburn and he goes, you're 1 centimeter dilated. So he said, we could place a cerclage tomorrow. So, and there's only a certain point where they could place a cerclage, to close the cervix up. It's usually, 22-ish weeks is like the last because then 24 is viability. And so at this point, I was like almost 20 weeks. So they said, we'll place a cerclage tomorrow. And he told me, he said, this is not going to promise you that you stay, that you keep this baby because, you could still go into labor with a cerclage. He said, go home, we'll place it tomorrow, we'll schedule it, I'll get you in, as soon as possible. So that night I went home and at 6 p.m. I started having contractions. So, and they weren't like, and I didn't think of them as like contractions, but then the after fact, I'm like, well, those were contractions. It was just like kind of cramping. And then at 9 p.m. my water broke. And that's what made me know that those were actually contractions. So my water broke, at 9 and we went straight to the hospital. So at that point, obviously not going to a birthing center. We went to just straight to Children's Hospital and we went in and they did an ultrasound and the baby was fine. But my water broke. So I had to continue with labor. And so he still had a heartbeat. Everything was fine. but she did, a swab to make sure that it was my water that broke, and it was. And so she said, you have the choice that we can give you meds to speed this up, or you can have a natural labor. And I said, I would like to just have it naturally, but I do want meds. Like I don't want to feel this labor. And so she said, we can do, an epidural. We can do, really whatever you want, because at this point we know the baby's not going to survive. So I wanted to go the epidural route, but because I had bleeding for 2 weeks, and obviously was not eating great for 2 weeks with everything going on, my blood pressure was like 90/55 for like the entire time I was there. So they're like, we can't give you an epidural. So they gave me some Dilaudid and fentanyl. And again, very similar, like how labor went. Like I was nauseous with Theodore. I was nauseous. I had, it ended up being like a 10-hour labor with him. But so they gave me some medication for nausea, some Zofran and Reglan. And so then I labored from, obviously, like my water broke at 9. I labored till about 3:30 in the morning, and then I delivered him. And so, and again, like delivering in a hospital, so we knew he was gonna like pass away. Obviously, like they said that he might be able to take like one breath when he comes out, and but they took him away to weigh him after I had him. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, so like that's not that, yeah. So
That's a great
um
example of why hospitals are not the best place to have a baby in any
like,
in any aspect.
my baby's not gonna survive. I don't really care how much he weighs right now.
I just have the only moment I'm gonna
Right.
get with him for his life. Thanks. That would
Exactly.
be nice. Yeah.
So some of my nurses were really good there. And I hate to say, I think it's habit for them. And I think it's just they're so used to doing what they do, and it's just what they do. It's like an assembly line. It's like, we're gonna weigh the baby, we're gonna wrap the baby, we're gonna hand you the baby. But they really were good in the way that they were like, we'll give you some time if you want to, take pictures. We will also take, him away, and we'll take pictures for you and give you. They gave us like a little, memory card of pictures, and they did his footprint and his handprint, and that kind of stuff. And we got like a little memory box, and unfortunately, we did have them, you know, at, I don't want to say unfortunately at Children's, but like I wish we did have them at like Sisters Hospital around here, because they have a little more grief support. The grief support system at the Children's Hospital was not good at all. Like the therapist was not even there. My morning nurse was like, you're not going to get a lot of ashes from him. I'm like that was said to me, and I was like, so we did cremate him, and so, but yeah, so then the next day, that they keep him right next to you, for as long as you want, and then we did go home, and obviously like went home with a box instead of a baby, but so that was really hard. And then like literally as we're walking out, we got the call from our doctor, because I was supposed to contact them to schedule the cerclage, and they're like, we're just wondering if you still want to do the cerclage. So that was a lot. But so yeah, so that was Lincoln. And he ended up being 9 ounces and 9 inches long. And he had 10 toes, 10 fingers. I mean, like, he was perfect. So they still don't know really what happened. I they did give me, Pitocin after, and I delivered the placenta. And obviously you can't really, like, the placenta delivery from a 20-week old versus a full-term baby, very different. But they biopsied. I refused an autopsy on him, just because from everything that they were telling me, he was fine. But they did biopsy the placenta, and everything came back fine. They said everything looked normal. They, again, were not sure, like, did I really have an incompetent cervix, which was in the need of, say, like the cerclage? Was there an issue with the placenta? So everything was just kind of like, we don't really know what happened. And um, so after that, he was due August 1st, and we didn't want to try for another baby until after his due date. We just felt like that wasn't, he was born on March 10th. We didn't feel like it was appropriate to try until after his actual due date. Um, so after his due date, we tried again, and we got pregnant like almost right away. And then I had a 5-week loss. So, and then, which honestly, like when people, which is an awful name for a chemical pregnancy, like, can we start renaming some of these things? Because it's just, I mean, come on. So, but that was probably one of the hardest losses because it was the first pregnancy I had after losing Lincoln, you know, and, kind of backtracking to Lincoln's postpartum time, everything's kind of like the same. I mean, even if it's like a 20-week versus 40-week, I still had bleeding. I still had, I still had hair loss. I still had some milk production. I still had, you know what I mean? So that was my postpartum. I ended up, again, trying to do everything right after. And I tried to go back to work earlier than I should have. And I ended up going back out because I emotionally couldn't be there. I think my emotions were obviously a little more of a mess postpartum with Lincoln than they were with Theodore, which obviously should have been. So, but everything physically the same. Like, yes, my body might have looked like it went back to normal faster, but physically, like, very similar. Everything, bleeding, hair loss, everything. So after that, I had the 5-week loss, and then we tried again, and I got pregnant, and with the next pregnancy, I wanted to go with a different midwife. Not that and we didn't end on bad terms, but I don't know. I didn't want to go with the same one that I had experience with Lincoln. And so I just chose, and there was only one other birthing center in Buffalo. And so I went with that one. And so when I went in for my 9-week and 5-day ultrasound, there was no heartbeat. And so from there, they decided, she's like, we can do, a D&C right now, or you can go on to have a natural, miscarriage. And I wanted to do a natural miscarriage. And within that time, so after I left there, I had no symptoms of any type of, it was a miscarriage. That's what it was, and so I had no symptoms. And until like probably a week after I left and had that ultrasound, because she's like, the heartbeat probably just stopped, because she's like, the baby's measuring at 9 weeks and 5 days, which was the day of my ultrasound. So, I ended up, like, probably a week later, I started having some brown spotting, but never like it ended up going to like 12 weeks in one day. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Like, my baby's inside of me, not living. Like, I need to go get some meds. So I ended up going back to my midwife, and I got medication, some cytotech to kind of speed up the process, obviously. And so I chose a morning, which this is awful to say, but like, you don't get time off to choose when you want to have a miscarriage. So I chose to have this miscarriage on a Friday, so that I would have the weekend to recover, to then go back to work on a Monday, which is that could be a whole different podcast, but we'll leave that as is. So I started the cytotech in the morning, and it was like, I can't remember, it was like 4 different doses of like a few different pills at a time that I would put under my tongue. You can also do it vaginally. And so I probably started at 7 a.m. And then around, I would say noon, I started having contractions. Like, it was like, it's like very strong right away. It wasn't like a slow progression of them. It was just very strong contractions right away. And I would say about a half hour later, my water broke. And this is all at home. My water broke, and I went to the bathroom, and I delivered the baby. And so and that was one reason why I didn't want to have a D&C. because I wanted to see my baby. And so, um, you know, we kept the baby because we wanted to. We planted a tree in the backyard for Lincoln, and so we buried that baby underneath the tree. Um, so because that's another thing with miscarriages, and you should do a whole nother podcast on loss, but
I
it
would love to if you're
they
actually
don't,
interested.
yeah, they don't do anything with miscarriages. So, like,
Yeah.
you just have to decide, do you want to flush your baby? Do you want to bury your baby in the backyard? You can't get him cremated. So, like, you have to decide, like, Lincoln was cremated, because he was big enough. Whereas then, this baby we decided to bury underneath Lincoln's tree. Um, so, um, we did that. And then, postpartum with that was again more emotionally difficult than physically. Still had obviously the bleeding, not as heavy, but because it wasn't like I had everything kind of came out at once. It wasn't like then I had to deliver the placenta separately. But yeah, so that was emotionally kind of draining. So after that, my midwife said, I think you need to go to a specialist. She goes, I don't know what's going on. She goes, but I don't think Lincoln's issue was this baby's issue. Like, they were two completely different things. This was just a miscarriage, probably from genetic issues, and Lincoln was more likely, some sort of issue with you, whether it be a cervical insufficiency or a placental issue. We're not sure. So I went to Buffalo IVF, um, and they did some testing on me. And actually, when I did go to do the testing, they found out that I still had fetal material in me. So I then, after having that miscarriage at home, had to then have a DNC. Anyways, so yeah. So
Oh my
after,
goodness. Rachel, wait, we just need to pause for a minute. This is so much. Like, oh my goodness. What, like, I cannot imagine going through all of this.
yeah,
I mean, you're able to talk about it pretty well, it seems like.
I, follow me on any social media. If anyone follows me, I'm very open about my loss,
Yeah.
I'm and I do that for a reason, because I do feel like a lot of people, like, if you caught me like a year after, I think if you caught me before I had Gabriel, my rainbow baby, I'd be crying right now telling my story. There's different times that grief comes in waves.
Hmm.
But I do share my story a lot, and I'm not afraid to. Um, but I think it needs to be talked about, because so many people go through stuff like this and they don't talk about it. Um,
Yep.
because
Totally.
they don't feel comfortable talking about it. Not only do they not feel comfortable talking about it, because they think it makes others feel uncomfortable. Which
Hmm.
I've had other people say, this makes me feel uncomfortable, and I'm like, I don't care. Like, you didn't have to go through it. I'm going to talk
Yeah.
about babies because they're my babies, whether you like it or not. So,
Yeah. And
yeah,
I so appreciate that because people need to hear that this is stuff that really does happen to other people. Because if it's happening to someone else and they're feeling alone in that, it can maybe make them feel less alone. And yeah, sure, maybe it makes some people feel uncomfortable, but like you said, that's their problem.
right.
This is your story. This happened to you. You've gone through this. You had to experience all of this trauma and this stress. I can't even imagine, the things that were going through your mind and probably wondering why is this happening to me so many times. Yeah, that's a lot to process. That's a lot to process and to keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah. And I do feel like my doulas were very helpful through this too, from an emotional standpoint. My one doula is very big on talking about death. She's like, there's one way in and one way out. And she's
Hmm.
huge on that. And I think that was a big plus to it. Um, so, I mean, now you start seeing there's death doulas now. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that, it's just kind of like maybe it is starting to turn a little, which is a good thing. Um, but yeah, so I did have to have a DNC. Um, and immediately after I had the DNC, we ended up getting pregnant with Gabe. And um, yeah, Gabe's pregnancy after loss is a very different pregnancy. Um, like I kind of referred to Theo's pregnancy as very naive. And I was, everything's fine. I feel great. With pregnancy after loss, every day is a new day, and you just got to get through that day. Every scan is a new scan. Every you know, it's just, you don't know what's going to happen next. And so um, I did get a cerclage placed at 14 weeks. I had gone to a different high risk doctor since my high risk doctor with Lincoln retired. So I went to a Dr. Link at Children's Hospital. And she actually said, I don't think you need a cerclage. But I think at that point I was just like, no, let's place one. Because I'm like, and at this point I look back and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to get another one if we have another baby. We'll see. I might just do serial ultrasounds. But so got a cerclage placed at 14 weeks. And with that, I had to, which was a huge, thing for me. I couldn't work out from week 14 to basically like viability. So, we pushed it a little further than 24. So it was more like 28, but even from 14 to 28 weeks, so 3 months, I still really couldn't, lift heavy after that because you can't really have pressure on the cervix, which was very hard for me personally to do, and I hate to say that, but really it's hard. Working out and exercising was a huge mental part, for me during pregnancy and not being pregnant. So then the cerclage came out at 37 weeks. So they typically remove it at 37. So it's just a little stitch that they put. I did have to go under anesthesia. And so they put their cerclage in, and it was a, in and out procedure, but they put the stitch in, and it does feel like I could feel it. But I think too in my head I was always, what made me more nervous was like, am I going to tear my cervix with walking or going up a flight of stairs or going, like, it was just this constant thought in my head. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to ruin my cervix. Like, and it's just this everyday thing, but I'm like, okay, but I am keeping my baby in. So anyway, so that was that. So then at 34 weeks, so my due date was December 29th of 2022. And so then when I was 34 weeks pregnant, my midwife, and this was a new midwife from when I had Lincoln, said, I'm not renewing my licensure for 2023. So I'm going to need you to find a new. See, and this is, I hate to laugh at it because at the time I was like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah,
but now,
at the time, I'm sure that was like the worst news, but
right,
now it's funny. But geez Louise, it's like,
right.
just keeps coming at you, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. So I'm like, okay, so who's going to take me with a cerclage at 34 weeks? And who's going to also of an out of hospital birth experience in hospital? Okay. So I end up finding Dr. Gil Farkash, who is amazing, who actually ended up placing my cerclage with Dr. Morrison, who was my midwife. And he does Ironman. So it was like this, almost like was he sent to us? So I was like, okay, so maybe it was meant to be. So anyway, so we found him. He removed my cerclage at 39 weeks. And it's not like once you remove the cerclage, the baby falls out of your cervix. Like, I actually ended up going 2 weeks still pregnant with no cerclage. And I thought I was going to go like in the new year because Theo came at 40 weeks and 5 days. But there was a big storm coming in Buffalo, and I don't know if it had anything to do with the pressure or anything, like the bariatric pressure, but my water broke the night before the storm came. So, and I don't know if you heard about that blizzard in Buffalo, but
I
like,
did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my water broke the night before the blizzard started. So
I would be terrified.
My doula, yeah. So my doulas are like, you have to get to the hospital. I'm like, I really wanted to labor as long as I wanted at home, so that I could walk into the hospital and basically have my kid as I'm walking in. And they're like, no, you can't do that. So my doula and my doctor were lucky enough to get to the hospital, and I had the best, I don't know if you want the best contractions. Can you say that? Like, the best controlled contractions. Let's put it that way. Of all of my births, my husband did a really good job at, hip pressure. We joke about it now because he's like, my hands hurt, and I'm like, stop it. So they were very well controlled. I was moving around, bouncing on a ball. And so that was really good. And then when it came to the pushing part, so I could not get the tub at the hospital. The drain didn't work. Of course, there's always something. So I couldn't sit in the tub. They don't let you deliver in the tub, but I could labor in the tub. but I couldn't do that because, of course, I get the room that didn't have the working tub. So I pushed for about 2 hours because the first hour and 45 minutes of pushing, he was stuck. He was stuck like on my pelvis, and he actually came out with a little mark on his head because after like a little while, we had with moving and moving around. Again, I didn't receive any epidural or anything, so like I was able to really move around as much as I wanted. Um, but then I finally was like sideways with a peanut ball in between my leg, and I felt a pop, and he had popped through like wherever he was stuck, and then I only had to push for like 15 more minutes, and then he was born, and I had like 10 people around me, like rubbing my kid, like patting me, like just like so much, and I looked over at my doula. I was like, what the F is going on? Because I was so overwhelmed because I was so used to that out of hospital setting. You know what I mean? And she's like, I know. She's like, I told you, like, this was going to, this is very different. Um, and like the delayed cord clamping was not delayed. I mean, it was like, it wasn't even a minute. And so, like, all that kind of stuff, it was just too much at once, too busy. But I know I have to do another hospital birth because I know that's just like, the way it is right now with having losses and, so, and there's no birthing center now that I can go to in the Buffalo area. So anyway, so we had Gabe on December 23rd, and then we were stuck in the hospital for 2 days because of the storm. And they ran out of food, and it was my other son was stuck at my sister's for Christmas morning. But anyways, he's here, and his middle name is Lincoln. So he's a little rainbow baby. And yeah, so postpartum with him, I started working out too soon again, but it was, I think, partially because I couldn't work out for 7 months. Um, and I think, there's a question on here is like, if you want another baby, yeah, we want another baby. And I think if we have another baby, hopefully God gives us another living baby. And I want to lay in bed for 2 weeks and not do anything, and I regret not doing that. But I did take 7 months off with Gabe. I took the longest I could with my job, where with Theodore, I only took 3 months. And I do encourage everyone, to stay out of work as long as you can. I mean, granted, I did have my private practice, which made it a little easier to get, some money. I understand not everyone, again, our, maternity leave here in the United States it's not great, but, I did have my private practice to help that out. But from a postpartum standpoint, bleeding standpoint, they gave me 2 bags of Pitocin after I had him. I had like minimal bleeding. I think I bled for 2 weeks, not even. That made a huge difference in my postpartum physical recovery. Mentally, there were hit and miss days because I was super happy that I had Gabe, but I was like, this should have been Lincoln. You know what I mean? Like, so it was like kind of like a, a happy, sad kind of moment, all mixed in with postpartum emotions. But it was kind of, it was nice because I finally had a living baby in my arms. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I wanted to ask if how was that for you in postpartum, having gone through all of that loss, and now here you are with your baby. Do you think that affected you? I mean, I'm sure it did, but do you want to share like how that you think that affected your postpartum with Gabe?
yeah, it definitely like felt good to have, like I said, have a living baby in my arms. Every time I looked at him, to have Lincoln in his middle name was nice. But it did like obviously make me sad at times. Um, and just to know that like even like after I had him, like literally, how like you're so in deep with like your emotions when you're in labor, like there's really no time to like get emotional because you're just trying to be strong to have this baby. And then after you, like, it's almost like everything leaves your body. And like after I had Gabe and he was on my chest, I started bawling because I was like, this was such a long journey, like it really was. And so that was, I think, the hardest part was just like you just hold your breath for like 2 years until he was finally out.
Yeah. And I can't imagine the level of anxiety, like if it were me going through what you went through, and then even having a pregnancy where things seem to be going well, and you're getting to the finish line, even through labor. I feel like I would be just thinking like, catastrophizing in my mind of some, like just waiting for something to go wrong almost. Did you feel that way, or were you able to kind of like just be in labor land and have a normal labor experience?
I was pretty much in labor land. I think, um, like again, I think my doulas. I mean, if you could get a doula, I highly recommend them. To anyone. They're just amazing. The way they kind of like bring you back to baseline and talk to you and calm you down, and not only for you but your husband, because I think, um, you know, they also give off a little bit of nervous energy onto you, because I think sometimes the husbands are more nervous than the wives, but um, they really are great at just kind of keeping you, paying attention to what the goal is, and the goal is to get the baby out. Um, and I think they were a huge support and an advocate for relaying what I wanted in my birth as my birth plan. And I know birth plans can never go exactly how you want them, but at one point my doula was like, you need to stop coming in here and asking her if she wants an epidural. You need to just leave her alone. She's fine. We'll come to you if we need anything. Um, like just stuff like that. You know what I mean? And just being there, like to say, like, take a sip of water. Like, it sounds dumb, but like those simple things, like, even though my husband was supposed to be in charge of like, here, take a sip of water through contractions, I think they just get so overwhelmed with everything too. You just need that extra person there. And so they are amazing people. So yeah, but emotionally, like, I think, there were happy and sad days after Gabe was born. But to this day we still talk about Lincoln, and we always will. Um, so, and we do want another one. So, um, we'll see how that goes. But
Yeah. I love your mention about doulas because I talk about doulas all the time and how amazing they are. And we kind of mentioned earlier that now there's death doulas and grief doulas and like bereavement doulas. So there's a doula for every, part of the motherhood journey in a sense, from like being pregnant to going into birth and to whatever can happen through all of those moments. So, and they're just invaluable. Like the value of a doula is priceless. I honestly can't express how much it can really help no matter what, just to get the outcome that you want. And even if you don't have the outcome that you want, to have someone there to support you through that experience is so important, because a huge piece of what is lacking is support for moms in all the stages of motherhood, I think. So, especially in through like birth and postpartum. So, yeah, just the maternal health care that we have in this country is so inadequate, 100%. So,
right.
yeah, so how did you breastfeed with Gabe? Did you, how did feeding yourself go, and kind of like feeling, getting back to normal? How long did it take for you? You said the bleeding wasn't as long. Did you have any tearing or anything with Gabe?
Yes, I had a like perianal tear, just a very small one. And they stitched that up, and then I breastfed again for 4 months. Kind of same with Theo. Towards the end, I did more, just kind of exclusively pumping, probably for like the last month. Um, and like I did try to eat a lot more with this postpartum journey, but it still didn't help my milk supply. I still was low. I don't, and I even like drinking water. Like, if anyone's ever had a baby and they're breastfeeding, like, oh my gosh, the thirst is like, but you just, nothing helped. Nothing helped my milk supply. So then at that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to be done again. Same thing. I probably felt normal after like 3-4 months. Like kind of more back to myself. Um, emotionally, like, yeah, I think it did pretty good compared to what I thought it was going to be like, from a standpoint of loss prior to that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought my postpartum journey with Gabe was pretty good. Um, like I said, I think I got into working out a little too soon. Like, again, I think I started around 4 weeks again. Walking probably started around 2 weeks. Nothing crazy, but I definitely wanted to get back into things because it was so long for me. before that I couldn't work out. So I think it was more of that standpoint. I probably would have waited longer if I was able to work out throughout my whole entire pregnancy, but I wasn't.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that was a big piece of who you are and your identity. And with everything that your body and your mind had gone through, I feel like it's like you're reaching out for something that's going to make you feel good and make you feel like you again, some level of normalcy, something that you're like, this is part of who I am. And it's something that I know is going to help me, like, physically and emotionally feel better. So, of course, you want to reach for that. Like, I can't blame you at all for being like, I really want to get back to this. But I love how you say if there is another baby in the future for you guys, you really want to take that rest
Yeah,
and take things slow. And I hope that you do get that, because that's probably going to be, I feel like I want that too for my next time, to really just focus on slowing down and hopefully have less anxiety than you do with the first child, because you
right,
don't know what you're doing and you've never done this before. Yeah, I love what you said at the beginning too, which made me feel kind of good, because we're maybe considering having a second. And you said that, 0 to 1 was a lot and really hard. And then, 1 to 2 wasn't so bad because, like, you kind of done it before. You have this more, like, laid back perspective.
right,
Which I feel like I'm gaining more and more as my daughter gets older. She just turned 2, and I'm like, okay, like, things happen now, and I'm like, you're fine, get up, like, let's,
right.
less helicopter parenting and, like, less anxiety with things. So that's reassuring, I guess, to hear from
Yeah,
someone who's been through a lot. So
yeah.
I appreciate that. But so it sounds like you potentially want another one. You kind of have a plan for that. Do you have any other specific things that you want postpartum to look like?
Um, no, just a lot of resting. I'm gonna be 40 this year, so I will be, this will be again another advanced maternal age. All my pregnancies are advanced maternal age, which is fine. You know what I mean? I consider myself healthy. Um, Hopefully we don't have any issues getting pregnant. We were trying before Dan got deployed, but that didn't work. So we'll see what happens. But postpartum, like I said, is really just relaxing more, because that's the only time you really can relax, because then once after that, it's like I said, it's crazy and chaotic. That was the first term I used into motherhood. Like, take the time to relax when you can, um, because after that it's just crazy, and it's a good crazy though. Do you know what I mean? So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I really think to physically relax, I think, and heal, I think I need to take a little time to myself and do a little less, and have my husband do a little more. Not that he wasn't, he's very helpful, but or reach out for more help, because that's also an issue of me, is that I have a very hard time of asking for help, and I think a lot of moms do. So
Yeah.
I think too that might end up being like, hey, whether that be some sort of nanny or babysitter for the other kids, I don't, I felt guilty about getting babysitters for even my kids when my husband was deployed, and at this point I'm like, hey, if that even allows me to get some stuff done without it needs to be done for my own mental health
Mm-hmm.
and physical health. So the reaching out for help too, I think, will have to be a little more in this next postpartum journey, especially because there'll be 2 other kids, and dogs in the house. Whereas, like, with your
Oh
first,
my God, yes.
really, there's nothing else to take care of. It's kind of like nice to relax, and but then you add in other kids that want to play or run around the house or jumping around, it gets a little harder.
Yeah, no, there's no question. You're only one person, right? Like, we can only do so much, and it's like this thing that we have, and I think it comes from societal pressures to,
Yeah,
like,
oh,
be a
yeah,
good mom, and you should be able to figure it all out, and you should know how to do everything without reading books or asking for help, or
mhm,
you should just intuitively, mother's to intuition, you should just know. And there's a little bit of truth to that. I mean, in some aspects, but I think that messaging and, like, that narrative around what motherhood should be like and what it should look like is harmful, because first of all, it's
yeah,
different for every single woman and family dynamic, because everyone's unique in what they need and what they can give and what their capacity is, right? And the support and the resources that they have. So there's one fault in that narrative. And then the
right,
other one is that we aren't meant to do it all alone. Like, if you
right,
look back to traditional cultures, some that still exist today, like modern hunter gatherer societies, like, the
There-
way that they have their culture set up is so different than ours. We're like, pull your bootstraps up, put on your big girl pants and deal with it yourself kind of mindset. and they are very communal. Like they live in, multi-generational homes where your mom is there and your sisters are there and your aunties are there and your uncles and brothers are, like, everyone's there to help the new mom and the new family and
Right.
support the new parents so that they can take care of their children. And we're just supposed to do it all alone. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But that's what we grow up, that's the messaging that we grow up with, so we don't know anything different, and then we're thrown into the ringer thinking that we should have this all figured out, wondering why we feel like a hot mess. So all that to say, yes, Rachel, you deserve to have a babysitter or a nanny or something. Do you guys have any family? Okay, I'm going to close this window because it got so bright. Hold
Okay.
on. Okay, so much better. It was like glaring in my face. Do you guys have any family nearby or anyone that, came over in early postpartum or at any point to help out with anything?
Um, yeah, my parents live close by, and then I have my sister. His parents are about an hour away. But I do feel like people don't know what to do postpartum. Like, it's like they want to come over and see the baby. They're not coming over to, make a dinner, empty your dishwasher, do a load of laundry. And I get it, you want to see the baby, but I think there's to that's not, no one knows what to do, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of it too. But then there was also me saying, like, no, I'm gonna make this meal 3 days postpartum because I like to cook. But do I really want to be standing around cooking as I'm, postpartum? Not really, but I think it's just what I'm supposed to be doing. Um,
Right.
so yeah.
Yeah, it's often all about baby, and again, that's part of our culture. It's nobody's fault because that's the
Right.
messaging that we're given is it's all this excitement about baby, and once baby's here and out of mom's body, mom doesn't really matter anymore. Like, who cares about mom? All we want to do is love on this baby. And I mean, I get it. It's also just like newborns are adorable and everyone wants to see the baby, and it makes sense, right? But at the same time, like, well, what about mom?
Right.
She's healing from labor and birth and basically running the equivalent of a marathon. She needs adequate nutrients. She needs nourishing foods. She needs rest. She's trying to figure out breastfeeding. She's healing from pushing a whole child out of her body or an abdominal surgery or whatever happened. And, I think people, they need to be told. They want to help. They really want to come and do exactly what is going to help the most. But like you said, they just don't know what to do. So they think that, oh, come and hold the baby because that's helpful, or that's, showing how I care about this family.
Yep.
Well, so let's see. The last question that I have, which is kind of grim to some, but I feel like we've talked about death a lot on this podcast, and death is a part of life. But when you die, Rachel, how do you want your kids to remember you?
As a loving mom, a fun mom, devoted mom, yeah, just all of those things. Um, I think a lot of times, sometimes we're so overwhelmed and we get so frustrated with our kids sometimes because, like, we're so, like, I'm overstimulated right now with my husband being gone. And I think sometimes I have to take a step back and be like, okay, relax and enjoy the time because this will go away. Um, but I do want my kids to remember me as just, she stopped what she was doing and had fun with us. She did what, she had fun with us. She loved us. And that's all, she did her best. And that's all we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. It's so hard to stop and be intentional with the time that we have because, like you said, it's very overwhelming. Even when you have your partner home with you, it can still be overwhelming. So I can't imagine doing it alone for extended periods of time. But that's beautiful. I don't see why, from the story that I've heard, I think your kids will think all of that and more of you. They're going to think the world of you. They already do, I'm sure. So, are there any resources that you want to share with the listeners? Like anything that helped you throughout any part of your journey, like other podcasts, websites? I know you've mentioned a bunch of amazing midwives and doctors and your doulas. We can link all them in the show notes if you would like. But if there's anything additional, books, anything like that.
Yeah. Actually, my first midwife co-wrote a book called Mama Natural. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book.
I feel like I have heard of it. I have not read it, but I feel like I've heard of it.
Okay. That's a good one. It goes through, like, week by week of, like, things going on in your body, things going on with baby, maybe things to think about, or that was probably my favorite book. And then obviously my doulas were a huge part. They Buffalo Birth and Baby. They also have like online resources. So if you're not in the Buffalo area, um, and classes, and so a lot of their classes are you could be done, virtually. So if you're interested in working with them, they're great. I do recommend, like my doula also gave pregnancy massages. I highly recommend them. She had like the table where your belly could go in, and then after I got to like 39 weeks with Theo, because I only made it to 39 with Gabe, but pressure points, with a massage, like that was nice. I also recommend a good pregnancy chiropractor. I have one here, Infinite chiropractor from Elena. She is amazing, but I highly recommend a chiropractor if you're really, especially if you're planning on having like a vaginal birth, just to kind of align that pelvis. And honestly, those chiropractors, she could tell me where my baby was better than the doctor could. And like, oh yeah, his butt's here, his head's here. Um,
Hmm.
and then pelvic floor therapist, again, Kathy Kiggins was amazing. She's in the Buffalo area, but if you have one locally that you can find, I also recommend a pelvic floor therapist during and postpartum. They probably won't do anything internal wise when you're pregnant, but after they can work on internal if you want to. And I also recommend prenatal yoga. My doulas actually did a class through Love in Motion. They also do it virtually, so if anyone's interested in that, you could do a virtual class with them. That was also very helpful to kind of like open things up.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, those are probably the main things I use. I know it sounds like a lot, but they are all very useful. I mean, little things that I did during pregnancy was like started using like red raspberry leaf tea at 36 weeks. Did it work? Did it help? I don't know, but it didn't taste bad. It made me drink more fluid. And then I also started using dates at 36 weeks, which I loved. Um, you know, if you have gestational diabetes, I always, a lot of people come to me and I'll recommend maybe adding some nuts or seeds, or, adding with some sort of protein or fat source. So it's not just, the sugar. But I also felt like it helped with bowel movements, because I feel like a lot of people do have issues with constipation during pregnancy. Um, Again, did the dates help? I don't know, but I thought I had some pretty decent labors, so yeah, I don't know. Those were kind of the things that I really did with the majority of my pregnancies. I also recommend continuing to move if you're moving before. I think sometimes we get pregnant, and I think the word is like you shouldn't be working out when you're pregnant. You shouldn't get your heart rate over this certain amount. And yes, there are certain complications or reasons why you shouldn't be working out, let's say like a cerclage. But really, you should be able to continue to move the way you were moving before you got pregnant. And then eating, like if you're struggling with eating, I've had a lot of people that were either trying to get pregnant or pregnant and they want to like eat healthier. Go see a dietitian. And I mean, as well as I know, like dietitians are important before, during, and after pregnancy. And I think we're underutilized in from that standpoint to work with moms. Um, there's lots of extra nutrients that we need. And there's a huge array of prenatals out there, and they're not all of them are the right ones for everyone. So I think that's something to really think about. And then there's some supplements that are not safe during pregnancy, and nowadays a lot of us are obsessed with supplements and vitamins and minerals, and you're not sure what you're able to or what you should take going into pregnancy, and sometimes the doctors don't know either. So I do highly recommend making an appointment with a dietitian. There is a book, it's called, I'm looking, The Real Food for Pregnancy. Have you heard that? Yeah.
I love Lily Nichols. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So
such a good resource. Yes. Yeah.
so that's another one. But yeah, and like sometimes it's just simply looking at your prenatals, like if there is constipation, like how much iron's in there. But then we need to worry about, like, will you become anemic, like those types of things. But like people don't think about that, because we're only worried about like certain things during pregnancy, and what specific amounts of vitamins and minerals in our prenatal is that's not what we're worried about. But sometimes it makes a difference in a lot of the ways we feel. So yeah, I don't know, there's a lot to go into it, but I think you really need to know your body too. And I think that's the one thing, especially with pregnancy, is start to learn your body more before you get pregnant, because there's going to be lots of changes, and you're the only one that's going to know the changes. And I also say speak up and ask for second opinions because, um, just like with my complications with Lincoln, like there was something wrong, and everyone just kept saying, nope, everything's fine. But for a lot of things. So if you're feeling in your gut that something's not right, be an advocate for yourself and ask for a second opinion or a different doctor or something.
Yeah. Such great resources. And the piece about your doctor, doctors don't get hardly any nutrition training. Like zero is the requirement. And
Yeah,
sometimes they get like a class, but
right.
then they are trying to talk to you about what you should and shouldn't eat in pregnancy. And they don't, it's all based off of like a food safety standpoint,
Right.
right? So, but it's not based off of a nutrition standpoint, which is actually, I mean, of course, food safety, you don't want to get a foodborne illness when you're pregnant because your immune system is a little suppressed. It can cause a lot of problems, but the actual risk of you getting a foodborne illness at any point in your life is so small, and the nutrients that you need to grow a healthy baby are so important that, like, you really got to weigh that. So that's why I love that you brought up working with a dietitian. So important. I love working with postpartum moms. That's the population that I see, and that's why I have the program that I have to take moms through once they've had their baby. Ideally we start working together when they're still pregnant, because we like to have that transition while we're together, and because that early postpartum is really important too, to have those really nourishing foods, to make sure you're resting, to make sure you have support in place, to have that plan. It could just really make the world of difference in the postpartum experience that a mom has. So I love that you brought that up because it is so important. So many great resources. So we'll link all of those in the show notes. And then if someone wants to reach out to you, if they have any more questions, if you're open, or if they want to work with you, since you do have your own private practice, where can people reach out?
Yep. So my website is buffalodietitian.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook as Buffalo Dietitian. And then within my website, there's a contact form. You can contact me that way or just email me directly at rachel@buffalodietitian.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your
Well,
story and being so open. I think this is going to help so many women, whoever listens to it. So, again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at the.moms.nutritionist and subscribe to this channel to be notified of each new episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast even further, please like this video and share it with a friend or anyone who could benefit from watching. This helps get the word out there, which helps moms heal and thrive.